Panda Bear, or Noah Lennox, is an American musician known as a founding member of the experimental, freaky, psychedelic pop band Animal Collective in the early 2000s. As a solo artist, however, he's been around a little earlier than that, and he released his third album, Person Pitch, which came out in 2007, 7 tracks long, 45 minutes, and it's definitely one of his most celebrated works. If I had to very briefly sum up why Person Pitch is such a great album, it's that he uses sampling and repetition in a unique way that creates these soundscapes that establish Panda Bear's very sunny, psychedelic, and blissful style. It's his unique sound that not only justifies how refreshing his approach to repetition is, but it gives this album so much character. And I think it's important to explain that an album that is unique doesn't necessarily mean it has to have a sense of character, but the main reason why this album has so much personality to me is because the sound that Panda Bear goes for is one that is very cohesive. It makes a lot of sense to me, and it's just very lively as a musical style. When I listen to this album, I can't help but make a correlation between the music here and the directing style of Wes Anderson. This is an album that I can very much identify with as being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. As I said earlier, it's very alive. I can just imagine this being a soundtrack to a film like Moonrise Kingdom. But with that being said, the lyrics I don't think accurately reflects the moods that I get from the sounds of this album, and I'll get into that later. And despite all these very seemingly upbeat qualities that this album has, there's also ambient elements, more or less so depending on the track. And I don't mean strictly ambient in terms of Brian Eno or Finesse, but on the more busier tracks, it still serves well as something that you can just put in the background and still be able to be influenced by the moods that are created on this album. And so on the surface, many tracks do sound quite minimalistic. The framework of this album mainly revolves around brief musical phrases that are just looped over many, many times, such as on the second half of the track, Bros. But as the tracks progress, and if you choose to tune into the music, you can find layers of detail. Panda Bear uses many production tricks and techniques to embellish and decorate this repetitive framework with chopped and screwed vocal samples, a ton of delay effects, definitely some reverb, and just all different kinds of weird everyday sounds. And the effect of that is that it creates what I like to describe as a sound collage, where a soundscape is just decorated with all these bits and pieces of audio, and it feels fragmented in that sense. But when you take a step back and look at the sound collage as a whole, it feels very cohesive. I think this happens most prominently in the 2 main tracks of this album, Bros and Good Girl Carrots. And I say that they're the main tracks because both of them are a lengthy 12 minutes long and perfectly fit the description of what I just talked about. And they are my favorites off this album. But that's not to neglect tracks such as the magnificent opening, Comfy and Nautica, which has a much stronger focus on melodic drive. Again, sampling and repetition is used a lot. Like I said earlier, it is like a framework that builds this album, minus the ambient tracks. But the other strong element that I've yet to actually mention that has a very strong presence is Panda Bear's vocals. It's Panda Bear's vocals that primarily give this album so much character, and one of the main reasons for that is, and I'm nowhere near the first person to make this kind of comparison, but his voice is naturally just very Beach Boys, Brian Wilson-esque. It's just got that sunny, peppy quality that you hear in a classic Beach Boys song. And the Southern girls with the way they talk. And even though it may seem like Panda Bear is perhaps wearing his influences a little too apparently on his sleeves, I think it's very much justified because he takes that era of sound and he places it in such a refreshingly new musical context of, electronics and sampling, things that are artificial in nature, yet they come together sounding so organic and just beautiful. And because of that, I just can't help but think that this album is really something creative and just something that's really special. You will rarely find albums like Person Pitch. You just won't. But despite all the positive things that I've said so far, I definitely wouldn't call this a perfect 10 out of 10 album for me. So to keep this review more balanced, I'm now going to talk about some things that I wish Panda Bear did a little differently on this album. As I said earlier, there are some more ambient tracks that appear on this album, such as I'm Not and Search for Delicious, and I don't mind them at all as they're individual tracks, but when I take a look at what Panda Bear did on Comfy and Nautica, Take Pills, Good Girl Carrots, and especially Bros. I can't help but wish Panda Bear continued producing those kinds of tracks. The ones where he takes advantage of his sampling techniques, the way he decorates and embellishes his samples and then layers them with his sunny, peppy vocal melodies. To me, that is what makes Person Pitch, and he doesn't really ever do it again on his other works, at least not in the same way that he does on this album. And because there are only really 4 out of the 7 tracks that really do this, I just can't help but feel like there's still a lot of potential to further explore this kind of musical style. Another thing that I wish is a little different are the lyrics, and I don't necessarily mean the words themselves, just more so how the lyrics are accompanied. Because like I said, I find the music to be very chirpy, but a lot of the lyrical content on this album have personal themes that aren't so chirpy. And again, the lyrics themselves are fine, it's just that when I'm listening to the album, the music is telling me one thing, and the lyrics are telling me another, and they just don't exactly synergize very clearly together. Anyway, to sum up, I think this is still a great album. It is unconventional, and I don't think it's for everyone. I know even some people think this album's kind of dull, and even for me, even the first time I listened to it, I didn't really click with it either. But after some time, I kept revisiting the album, and I just really grew to appreciate how unique it is. And it's not just different for the sake of being different, but as I've obviously explained in this review, it really works because you will rarely find albums that create these kinds of soundscapes that so clearly boasts a playfulness. And it just really solidifies Panda Bear as an iconic artist that you can just really identify with.